Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Frey. We have started our tour through the Riverlands, looking at the interesting houses, not just the biggest houses, but the houses that are having a sort of a disproportionate impact on the plot in A Song of Ice and Fire. We looked last time at House Blackwood. Not sure where we'll go next week, but this week we are looking at House Frey. Now, obviously, there's the Red Wedding, but their plot is so much bigger than that. The family is so much bigger than that. This is one of the recurring themes we're going to be getting all the way through this evening, I'm sure, is quite how sprawling, quite how big House Frey is. So, as always, I will frame this around questions from my patrons. As always, I will try and get to as many questions in the chat. But I will start off with a bit of an overview of House Frey, where they're at in the plot, as well as their history slightly more broadly. So, House Frey are one of the younger houses in Westeros, comparatively speaking. A lot of the houses we've been looking at previously and will be looking at in coming weeks are thousands of years old. They've got their heritage going all the way back to the Age of Heroes, or even earlier than the Age of Heroes. Not so House Frey. House Frey is about 600 years old. Now, they weren't a noble family before, and then they were awarded a tract of land and a lordship. We don't know the details of why or how. This was, in fact, actually, let me just do a quick, see that I can, there we go. Love getting this map up. This map is from quartermaster.info. Please do go and check them out. House Frey were awarded this tract of land in the north, the very north of the Riverlands. This was at a time when, this is before Aegon's conquest, very probably the ruling family in the Riverlands at the time were House Durrandon, who come all the way from Storm's End. They're the sort of the predecessors of Baratheons, really. And for about 300 years or so, even a little bit more, they ruled the Riverlands. On and off, there was plenty of rebellions during that time. But at some point during that, the Freys were awarded this land. And the land that they were given, if you look at this map, you'll see sort of towards the top middle, you can see the neck there. That's where Greywater Watch is, just up there. Moat Cailin, this is where the Crannogmen live. Just south of there, where you see that little bit of forest coming down, the little red dot just south of that, bestriding the river, the Green Fork River, is what became known as the Twins, the home of House Frey. Now, this probably at the time didn't feel like a particularly promising area. This was right pushed up against the swampy marshland there of the neck, and it was dissected by the river, the Green Fork River, which was massive. We're told at this point it's wide, it is deep, and it's got a really strong current, and it doesn't stay the same size. It's not like a river where you know where the boundaries of it are. It can, in fact, it does. When we get to the Red Wedding, Cat looks at it. Cat knows the river's there. She grew up in the Riverlands, and she notes that it's about half again the size it was earlier in the year. It can grow and shrink. It's quite a tough river, and this forms a huge defense, a huge sort of line, a barrier all the way down the middle of Westeros. It starts up, the Green Fork River starts in the neck, and it heads all the way down the middle until it meets up with the other two fork rivers, the Blue and the Red Fork, forming the Trident, which then flows out, as you can see, across eventually into the Narrow Sea. So, House Frey new young house were given this land, which probably didn't come across as being great. But they had a plan. And the plan was to build a bridge over this river. And this was a mammoth undertaking, it has to be said. We're told that it took 3 generations. It was the grandson of the original, the first Lord Frey, who finally managed to get that bridge across the river. So this took, we don't know, but perhaps even decades. Once they'd done that, they placed a wooden castle on either side. In time, they replaced those wooden castles with stone castles. The bridge became a big stone bridge, wide across the river. And that became known as the Twins, because the castles, one on each side of the river, and the bridge that goes across between them. So this was important, not just because it allowed them to join up their own lands, but because this allowed them to charge people to cross the river. They obviously somewhere managed to they owned the land, so they could do what they wanted with it, but they kept through time, regardless of who the king was of the land at the time, they kept the right to be charging people to be crossing the river. And this was important because the next safe crossing of the river is all the way down. If you look on this map, you see the lake down there, sort of bottom middle. That is the God's Eye Lake, and just sort of northeast of that, you get the Ruby Ford, which becomes famous later with the Battle of the Trident. But that is the next crossing across the Green Fork or the Trident River, and as a result, because travel was still quite slow. Most people were on foot, maybe a horse or in a cart. If you wished to travel from anywhere on the west to the east or east to the west across Westeros, not up and down, you had a choice. You could go days, weeks even, out of your way down to the Ruby Ford, cross over and then head back up again, or you could pay the toll over the river at the Twins. And over time, people did pay this toll. And House Frey started to grow rich on this money. By the time we get to the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, they are one of the richer houses in the Seven Kingdoms. And they're not the richest. Obviously, we've got the Lannisters and people like that who are the richest. But they're certainly the richest within the Riverlands, and certainly the second most powerful family after House Tully in the Riverlands, because they have got this monopoly on transport across east-west, across the northern half of the Riverlands like that. So that's basically was their plan, and it worked really well. They kept going with this for the next 600 years, and to be honest, we don't hear much about them for most of that time. For the first 300 years or so leading up to Aegon's invasion, we don't really hear much, but we don't hear huge amounts about most of what's going on in the Seven Kingdoms. But they sort of kind of survive and keep going. When Aegon invades, they're one of the first in the Riverlands to be bending the knee to the Targaryens. The Tullys become Lords Paramount, but the Freys keep on doing what they've always been doing. We do hear about them in the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, the wonderfully named Forest Frey, who, as a young man, he basically proposed to Rhaenyra, and everybody laughed at him, because why on earth would Rhaenyra, when she was still a princess, marry this Frey? And this kind of sums up a lot of the attitude from the houses, and we have questions on this later, so I won't unpack it too much now. But the attitude from a lot of the older, more established houses was always House Frey. You can look down on them a little bit. They haven't got the history, they haven't got the class, they haven't got the honor. They're just an upstart family. I mean, they've been there for 600 years, but still, they're so much younger than all the other families. And they're always a little bit looked down on. Anyway, when it comes to the Dance of the Dragons, they do eventually side with Team Black. So they side with Rhaenyra and get involved. Forrest Frey does get involved in 3 or 4 battles that happen. There's a lot of battles that happen in the Riverlands, as you will find in House of the Dragon. And he unfortunately dies during that time as well. But then again, it goes broadly quiet for a while. We can fast forward next to the time of Dunk and Egg. We get, in the first Dunk and Egg story, there are some Freys at the tourney at Ashford Meadow in the Hedge Knight. They don't play a huge part in that story, but there is a significant moment in the third Dunk and Egg story, which is the Mystery Night. Now, this is, if you look at the bigger picture, this is actually a story of the Second Blackfire Rebellion. So in what happens there, Dunk and Egg basically happen across a wedding and a tourney. They hear that this tourney is going to happen. Dunk wants to take part in the tourney. They pitch up at White Walls, and there's a tourney going on. And very slowly but very surely, they uncover this plot. Egg figures it out. Dunk is happily oblivious. He hears everything. He seems to be at the center of everything, but he's happily oblivious to everything that's going on. Egg, however, figures out this is a traitor's tourney, he says. And the significance of this is that these are all of the houses that were loyal to the original Blackfire Rebellion, plotting to put the Blackfires back in place, plotting another rebellion. And the excuse for getting everyone together was this tourney, but it was also a wedding. And it was a wedding between Lord Butterwell's son and the Lord Frey's daughter. So the Freys are there. And we don't get a first name for Lord Frey here, incidentally, but Lord Frey is there. And he's sort of hosting. So he's right at the center of things. And he has with him his little son, very young, who is sniveling and incredibly unpleasant. And this is a very, very young Walder Frey, who we will obviously know as the story develops. But what is interesting is that despite the fact that the Freys were right at the center of this, they somehow seem to get away with it. Lord Butterwell, the house gets decimated. It sort of survives, but White Walls gets... the family castle gets destroyed, salt across the land, nothing can ever grow there again, or pretty much all of his riches gone. Lord Frey seems to get away with it. There's a hint, more than a hint, I think we can go there. I can't remember if I've got a question on this, but we can come back to this later. There's more than a hint that he perhaps turned his back on, once he saw which way the wind was blowing, he turned his back on his erstwhile allies and went and blabbed everything to Bloodraven. And they escape. They get away with it. Fast forward again another few years until we get to Robert's Rebellion. And during Robert's Rebellion, House Frey are there, called upon by their Lords Paramount, the Tullys, to join the battle, join the war, which they say they do, but very late. They arrive too late to the key battle in this war, with the Battle of the Trident. They arrive just after the battle basically is finished, and they don't have to take part. And Hostatully from that moment on calls Walder Frey the late Walder Frey. And this is seen as deliberate on Walder Frey's part, just to hold off and wait and see. Let's see who's going to come out on top, and then I'll go to their side. So already there's this kind of feeling that they're not really to be trusted. Fast forward again. Walder Frey, by this point, by the time we get to the story, Walder Frey is in his 90s. He's a very, very old man. But he's on his 8th wife by this point. He's had well over 20 children and dozens and dozens of offspring beyond that. Their children, their children's children, their children's children's children. House Frey is massive, and it is married to houses across the land. It is still rich, but it's also now connected to a lot of different families. And then we get to the story that we know. I won't go into too much detail. I'm sure we're all very aware of the sort of the build up to the Red Wedding, but it's worth just underlining a few points, I think, just as we're going through this. House Frey again and Walder Frey hedging their bets. They're waiting to see which way the wind is blowing. They should, by all rights, have just let Rob and his army across, or just charge them a small amount of money or something like that, because they were there to relieve their liege lords, the Tullys, who were being besieged at River Run. In fact, even taking one step before that, they probably should have sent an army out themselves to go and try and help the Tullys, but they haven't, and instead they are there negotiating an incredibly high price just to cross over a bridge. Because when you think about it, it's a very high price. Rob is the most eligible bachelor in the north by a long way, and he is going to marry a Frey. And not only that, but Arya was going to have to marry a Frey. And not only that, but two Freys were going to go up and be fostered in Winterfell. And not only that, but another Frey was going to be Rob's squire. This was it's a whole list of all of these things, these demands that basically Catelyn had to accept. It was a very high price for something that they could, if they'd just been a good, loyal house, they could have just let Rob go through. So, however, the die was cast. The Freys were on Rob Stark's side until things shifted. And when we get to the Red Wedding, I've done a couple of videos on this recently, so if you want all of the background to that, do check those out. But I don't know whether this is to be fair to the Freys, the driving force behind the Red Wedding is actually Roose Bolton. Yes, this was hosted by the Freys. Yes, it was planned by the Freys. Yes, it was the Freys who had blood on their hands. But the driving force was Roose Bolton. And the key point in that, Cat notices this. George R. R. Martin uses Cat as a clever person who spots things. And one of the things that she spots during the actual wedding itself, before all of the drama, is Roose Bolton gives this very short little speech from the front where he very obviously mentions the fact that he's got two more of the Freys. The Freys are everywhere at the Dreadfort right now. And Cat notices that Walder Frey looks very uncomfortable at this. Basically, Roose Bolton is threatening Walder Frey and saying, if you don't go through with this, then you know what's going to happen to these two Freys that we've got. So it is Roose Bolton who was the driving force, but obviously Walder Frey was the most significant player there. Once that has happened, the question is, where do the Freys go next? Because the Lannisters then are taking over the Riverlands. I suspect that Walder Frey was hoping that he would then be made Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, but he wasn't. They were given River Run, and he was allowed. One of his sons was allowed to set up effectively a cadet branch of the Freys, House Frey of River Run, but they were not made Lords Paramount of the Riverlands. That honour went to Peter Baelish of Harrenhal. He was given Harrenhal, and he was made the Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. So, what has Walder Frey gained from this? Well, he has now got himself a position of great strength. He's gained himself an extra castle with a cadet family down in Riverrun, and also he is through one of his granddaughters, Walder Frey, Walda, married to Roose Bolton, who is now the Warden of the North. So he has expanded his influence. However, everybody held House Frey in low regard to start with, and that's just gone through the floor. So that's the situation we've got. Walder Frey is now staying. He is in the Twins. But we have got more Freys down in the River Run. We've got a whole load of Freys who went up to the north with Hostine Frey. They've got it they're currently in Winterfell. So the Freys are dotted about. There's a whole load of them just sort of around and about in the Riverlands. And one thing which I will come back to this again when we've got some questions on it. One thing which is very noticeable is that yes, there are lots of Freys, but also the Freys are dying very quickly. We often look for, is there going to be like an extinction event for the Freys, like there was on the TV show when Arya came in and killed all the Freys? But the reality is, at the moment, that may or may not happen. Again, we will talk about this later, but at the moment, the Freys are dying out. Everywhere you look, Freys are being killed. Everybody has got the grudge against the Freys, pretty much, because the Freys were married to so many people, because so many members of the North were in the Red Wedding. Lots of people have got a grudge against the Freys. So that's the broad outline of House Frey. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. I think I had maybe I thought I had a couple of super chats. Let me just have a quick flick back, and I will try and find them. Just one moment. Right, so Steve Ash Lerner Turner, your bad joke for the stream. You do this every week. Thank you, I very much appreciate it. What's ET short for? Because he's only got little legs. Thank you very much. P.S. Modlove and merch push, Robert. Well, thank you very much for the reminders. Modlove, yes, we can give an early shout out to the moderators. The moderators are amazing. I can see there's 3 or 4 of them already in the chat doing wonderful work as always. Please do show them a little bit of love. Merch push. Yeah, if you want merch, hopefully down below here somewhere there will be some merch. Check it out. Is that enough of a push? I hope so. So thank you very much for that. Keep it real, Fox. Thank you very much for the super sticker. I appreciate it. And Jasper Lane. Wow, very generous, Jasper. I hugely appreciate that. That's very kind. Saying, I know I arrived a little late, but this sounds like a lot of Stark propaganda. Frey did nothing wrong. Well, I mean, discuss that. Did the Freys do nothing wrong? They were playing the game. I think the way that they would probably see it, and the way that always with the Game of Thrones is, you win or you die. They would say that we won, the other people died. So that is how they would see it, and they would expect in time, in history, would look back at this and say, well, they did a clever move there. But did they do wrong? Well, they broke guest right. And so everybody, particularly everybody in the north, where they take it very seriously, if they had a bad reputation before, they've got an even worse reputation now. So even from a kind of a realpolitik perspective, I think you have to say that the Red Wedding did not advance their cause, and it certainly didn't advance their cause in the way that they'd hoped, for something which would ruin their reputation as much as that did and make them as many enemies as that did. What did they actually... an extra castle on the cadet branch is, I think, basically the answer. Right, let's go to question from DM Collins. Thank you very much. Have there been any heroic, interesting, not sneaky Freys at any point in history, and are they stronger now than they have ever been in the past? Well, on that second point, are they stronger now than they've ever been in the past? I think the answer has to be yes. Certainly at the start of the A Song of Ice and Fire, there are just so many of them, and the house, it took its time, but it's been slowly building up its resources. The army that they can put into the field is the second largest in the Riverlands. They are married to a huge number of very influential families, including the Lannisters, for example, and now also the Wardens of the North, the Boltons. So one could argue, yes, they're about as powerful as they have been, but as the story is progressing, I think we're starting to see where the cracks are in that position of strength. As for the first part, have there been any heroic, interesting, not sneaky Freys? This is actually the... I've got a few questions related to this from my patrons. Namberios saying, happy Thursday to you too. Is House Frey the worst? And why are they in fact the worst? But was House Frey ever respectable? Not just wealthy or powerful, but actually respectable. Zvibo saying, House Frey seem to have a pretty bad reputation. Is that something that's just thanks to Walder? Or, like the Boltons, are they a consistently problematic house throughout history? Are there good Freys along the way? The King's Road saying, g'day to you. The Freys are portrayed as people with cunning and untrustworthy nature for the most part, especially through the betrayal of guest right at the Red Wedding. Do we know of any Freys in history who go against this perception and were respectable or honourable? All the best from sunny Toowoomba. Which is a great name in Australia. Okay, so let's talk about the house character, because there is clearly a house character, and just from the potted history I gave at the beginning of this stream, I think you can probably pick out, generally speaking, they are opportunistic as a house. They are pragmatic. They clearly don't care so much for what people think about them. And they are also, I mean, you could call it sneaky, you could call it clever, you could call it playing the game, but they seem to be quite flexible with where their loyalties are. Let's put it that way. Are we siding with the Blackfire Rebellion? Nope, we're going to go the other side. Are we siding with Robert's Rebellion? Oh, yeah, looks like they are going to win. We're going to go with that. Are we going to go with Robb Stark helping him out after we've basically not gone to help our liege lord? Yeah, if he gives us enough. Then they betray them. So their loyalties are, through history, have been quite malleable. And they have been trying to look after their family first and foremost. So that is the general house character. And it's something that, I mean, if you were to critique George R.R. Martin, and his sort of world building, one of the things which is very apparent that he does rely on is this idea of a house character. And a house look as well. The Frey look is generally called sort of a stoat-ish, weaselly, which perhaps is him trying to show us a little bit about their character or how other people see them. But that does seem to be the character of them all the way through. Now, the first thing to say when we're trying to say, are there any redeeming characters in this? The first thing to say is we simply do not know most of the history of House Frey. I mean, this goes for all the houses, but for most of the houses, we've got big characters who appear here and there and do stuff. The House Frey don't. There are no massive heroes who suddenly appear and lead, who sort of suddenly invade lots of places and become kings. There's no war leaders. There's no completely outstanding individuals that you look at and go, wow, that's a paragon of virtue there. That's not how they are. In fact, for the first 300 years or so, we basically don't know the names of any Freys. And since the Aegon's invasion, since the Targaryen rule started, they have still largely kept themselves to themselves for the most part. Given the fact that they are the second most powerful house in the Riverlands, you would have expected them to be playing more of a role. Are there any significant Kingsguard members, generals? Are there any people who have won lots of tourneys who are Freys? No, is the short answer. They've largely not been visible on the national stage. We do get a few names from time to time, but it's not a patch on some of the other families of sort of similar size, like that the Royces, say, or someone of that kind of stature, or House Dane even. These houses have got people in their history that you can look at and go, yeah, that's a noteworthy and impressive individual. That doesn't seem to be the case with the Freys. Broadly speaking, they've been focusing on doing their own stuff. Are there any redeeming characters? It's hard to find a particular beacon of wonderfulness. It has to be said when you read through the history of House Frey. There are a few names that you can, but Forest Frey, who I name checked earlier, he was the person during the Dance of the Dragons. He appears not as bad probably as the other Freys, and I think if anything we should perhaps be giving him our sympathy. He was laughed at for Frey the foolish Frey the fool. I can't remember exactly what they called him, but he was laughed at for his proposal, and I think this is the kind of thing that when it's a house we naturally sympathize with. If somebody from that house did that and got laughed at, we would feel sympathy for them. So I think we do have to feel sympathy for this guy. And he did seem to do what was needed in the war that followed. So I think we can put him down as one of the better Freys. There's also Oliver Frey in the story that we have, who he's something like 17th son of Walder Frey. He's the one who gets made the squire for Robb Stark, and he becomes really good friends with him, and he becomes really loyal to Robb Stark. And when Robb breaks the pact that he had, the marriage pact he had with the Freys, all the Freys who were with Robb, basically they just got up and left and went back and abandoned him in the Westerlands, and he then had to abandon his plans for attacking things in the west and head back. Oliver didn't want to go with the Freys. He wanted to stay with Robb, but eventually he got forced to, so he headed off. He then pretty much disappears. Maybe we'll talk about him a little bit later in the stream as well. There's some interesting theories about where he might be, but he wasn't at the Red Wedding. He was presumably deemed too loyal to Robb to be at the Red Wedding, but he seems like a decent enough guy. And I also want to do a shout out for a character that we probably won't talk again about in the stream, but I think George R. R. Martin wants us to feel sympathetic towards. And this is Merrett Frey. Now, he's the character, he's the POV character. We get a POV chapter from a Frey. The last chapter, the epilogue of Storm of Swords. And the point of this chapter as an epilogue is to introduce Lady Stoneheart. And it's actually, now we know Lady Stoneheart's there, perhaps it loses its impact a bit, but at the time, this was actually quite a scary moment, is that she gets this big reveal just a few pages from the end of the book, and she is on a mission of vengeance against all Freys. And we see this from basically Merrett Frey gets sent off to seek out the Brotherhood Without Banners. He's sort of on a peace mission. He's come with some money to give them, basically there to sort of the ruse was that they were ransoming off a prisoner, and he went there with some money for them, but they double cross him, and they try and get information from him, and then they kill him. They hang him, and it's all quite horrific. And the reason why they hang him is that Lady Stoneheart's there, and they say, was this guy involved at the Red Wedding? And it's like, yep, so he's gonna die. And we're, I think, supposed to have a bit of sympathy for him, and to see quite how broad Lady Stoneheart views her remit for revenge. Merrett Frey, yeah, he's a Frey. Yes, he was involved, but there was no real way for him not to be involved. And when you see his POV, you get this actually quite tragic backstory. He seems to have got a really bad injury, a head injury, when he was at war in his much younger days, which gave him these splitting headaches. It gave him post-traumatic stress, and the only way that he could find to cope with it was through alcohol, through drinking. He became an alcoholic. He's got this terrible downward kind of trajectory in his life, and he's quite high up in the line of succession in the grand scheme of things for the Freys, but he's viewed with disdain even by the Freys. And he's kind of hopeful of maybe getting a bit of respect, but doesn't think he's going to get it. He is there at the Red Wedding. His job is to get drunk with Great John Umber, and that's it, is to drink Great John Umber under the table. He fails miserably. Great John Umber is a huge guy, 7 foot tall. He can drink a huge amount. Even the alcoholic Merrett Frey cannot. He passes out, basically, and plays no actual part in the murder and horrific things that come later. But that doesn't matter. Lady Stoneheart kills him without even giving him a chance to defend himself. So is he a good guy? I think you'd find it hard to say that he's a good guy, but at the same time, I think he's someone that George R. R. Martin wants us to feel a bit sympathetic towards, to understand that whereas we may completely understand Cat Stark, Lady Stoneheart's mission of revenge, this isn't anything approaching justice. This is just revenge. Okay, so that was DM Collins. Thank you very much for that. A question from Darius Hutchinson. Will Bran's powers reanimate the Blackwood tree, and will he merge with the Weirwoods on the Isle of Faces? OGs start in exile, by the way, and then are in the center. Okay, so I mean, this is talking about House Blackwood, which we were talking about last week. I'll quickly cover this, though. Will he reanimate the Blackwood Weirwood Tree? I don't think so. I think that is dead. Will he merge with the Weirwoods on the Isle of Faces? I think there's a fair to middling chance he does end up on the Isle of Faces. We will, in some way, shape, or form, encounter the Isle of Faces in this story. I have absolutely no doubt. This is a complete digression, but if you ever fancy just like a little wormhole, like really quite intriguing way of looking at A Song of Ice and Fire, look at the first half or so of book one. That is the story that George R. R. Martin was writing when he thought he was only writing 3 books. And why is that important? That is important because of the pacing. So the things he was introducing concepts in book one, in the first half of book one, that he thought would pay off in a couple of books' time, not in 5, 6, 7, who knows how many books' time. Once he realized that this was not going to just be 3 books, he really slowed down the pace of a lot of this. And one of the most obvious examples is the Isle of Faces. The Isle of Faces is mentioned a lot. I think it's something like 5 times in the book one, certainly the early part of this story, and it's given quite a lot of attention, even when random things like Sir Jorah is talking to Dany and he mentions the highlights of the 7 Kingdoms, and he talks about the Isle of Faces, and it's like, I mean, why would Jorah, this person from Bear Island, be talking about the Isle of Faces? But he clearly sees this as one of the handful of most important things you need to be talking about. Then George R. R. Martin pretty much stops mentioning it. He has sort of admitted in interviews that, yeah, this is because it will be important later, but he didn't want to sort of big it up too much. Now he knows he's got a much longer story that he's writing. So that's a digression. But what it means is that with the Isle of Faces is going to be important later. It's just that he's just slowed down the revelations about it. Other interesting things there, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, have a look at how often, say, Tyrion thinks and talks about dragons in the first half of book one, and then it goes very quiet for the next 2 or 3 books. That's a fascinating wormhole to go down as well. But your general point that sort of this kind of hero's journey, I guess, the OGs going in exile and then back at the center with Bran, it's definitely worth saying, for those who don't know, George R. R. Martin has said, we'd always talk about him being this gardener writer. He kind of making this story up as he's going along, but he's always maintained he does know broad brushstrokes, but he does know how this story is going to end, and he's known from the beginning. And the beginning, the very first image that he ever had thinking about this whole world, this whole story, was that image of that scene with the direwolf pups. And he originally thought this from Bran's perspective, because that was a Bran chapter. And then he says, after that, he started thinking, okay, so Bran needs a family. Who are they going to be? So if you're wanting to get into where does George, not just where does the story start? It does start with Bran, chapter 1, Bran, but also where did George R. R. Martin's ideas start? It's with Bran. And so if you're looking for a classical arc, then it goes from the beginning through to the end as here's Bran's starting point, where's his end point going to be? This is not Alex. A question saying, do you think the Red Wedding could have been avoided, or was Rob always doomed to die? Well, interesting question. Could it have been avoided? Yes. But things would have had to go very differently. The problem with all of these things is that the sort of the probability tree expands out very quickly the moment that you start talking about different things going on. What would have happened if Rob's plan had worked, if he had managed to tempt Tywin out to the Westerlands? Could Roose Bolton then have realised, actually, now I've got a chance to go in and attack King's Landing? What if the alliance between the Lannisters and the Tyrells hadn't worked? What if Stannis had taken King's Landing? That would have left the Lannisters in a much weaker position. The Boltons, the Freys would not have been allying themselves with them, because Roose Bolton is a pragmatic man. He only went where he was going. He only did what he did because he knew that he had the backing of the most powerful family in Westeros. So was it inevitable? No, it wasn't inevitable. But the way that the story panned out, there was no other way around this. Once, I think it's probably fair to say that once Rob had reneged on his agreement to marry a Frey, that always left him in a really awkward situation. Now, it's fair to say, again, as I said earlier in the stream, George R. Martin uses Kat as a clever person to be showing us stuff. She, although she thinks, Rob might be able to get away with this, all the way through, if you read those couple of chapters from her around the Red Wedding and just before it, she's nervous. She's concerned that something's going to happen. She even says to Rob, the first moment you get, make sure that you eat the food. You ask for food if they're going to offer it. We have to get guest right. She's concerned they're going to do something. She is concerned that the Freys are capable of it. So this might be, and it's supposed to be, shocking to us. But from the moment that Rob did that, Kat knew that that was a possibility. It was a matter of whether or not the other things were, coming together. And Kat played her own part in this by ostracizing the Carstarks, for example, and so by freeing Jaime, and also the decision to let Roose Bolton basically go off and run his own war for a while. There's lots of moving parts here, but I think the best we can say is it was the moment Rob married Jane Westling, it was always a possibility that something would happen. Not necessarily exactly that, but something like that. Let's go to a question. Kelly Summers saying, "Hi Robert, hi there. How did House Frey manage to secure such a prime spot in Westeros? They became rich by controlling the most passable point of the river, but wouldn't a Stark, Gardner, Hoare, Durrandon, Lannister, etc., have seen an opportunity to control such a strategic location for trade and war? The Starks had Moat Cailin to defend one route to the north. Why not try to occupy the other?" Okay, so I think the important point here, have I still got the map up? I probably didn't even check that. Yes, I have. Let's use the map for just one moment. So as I was saying right at the beginning of this stream, I don't think fundamentally this was deemed to be a prime spot for crossing the river. When it was given to the Freys, I don't think anyone thought, oh, they've got an amazing spot. If only they built a bridge. This bridge took them 3 generations to build. This was hard work. And so I don't think it was that they got given it. I think they worked hard. I mean, and we should give them credit for this. They worked really hard to build that bridge. And I suspect lots of people died in the efforts. So that's, I think, the first thing, is it wasn't a It wasn't immediately a prime bit of land. Once, however, they had got that bridge, might other people take it from them? Well, I think the geopolitical situation probably helped them, because in the years of hundreds of small petty kingdoms, then probably people would have tried to take them. But they actually had 3 pretty strong rulers over that land during their 600 years of rule. First, House Durrandon ruled for 300 years. And they almost certainly, the Freys had House Durrandon's support, or otherwise they wouldn't have survived. So that's the first. Despite the fact that there were 5 or 6 different attempts to rebel against House Durrandon, because they weren't Riverlands people, the Durrandons, they came all the way from the south. 5 or 6 attempts, nobody quite worked, which clearly shows there's no one who is quite powerful enough to even push a family that aren't from the Riverlands out of the Riverlands, let alone take a castle to the north. And then after that, House Hoare from the Iron Islands came, and they again were very strong. This was Harren the Black who built Harrenhal, showing the great strength of that house. We look at Harrenhal as being this object lesson in pride coming before a fall and things like that. But this was they clearly had huge resources and strength to be able to build the biggest castle in the 7 Kingdoms. And then came the Targaryens, and the Targaryens ruling the entire 7 Kingdoms. Basically, they put in place the boundaries for everyone, and if you did something, if you started trying to dispute those boundaries, then you've got a whole load of people with dragons who have a problem with you, because they wanted peace in the realm. So I think the historical situation supported the Freys, because there was always a strong family above them in the food chain who at least tolerated, if not supported them. As for sort of access to the north, this is not quite, as you can see from the map, so this is to the left of the King's Road. The King's Road and the causeway through the neck is the overland route into the neck. If you go up the river from north from the Twins, you get into the neck and you basically end up in swampland. Okay, let's go to question from let's have a see who we've got. Mr. Worldwide saying, "Good morrow, Robert. What's a house got to do to get some respect around the realm? The Freys seem to be an objectively strong house. They have good lands, a defensible castles, formidable army, wealth, and plenty of heirs. Yet they seem to have this undesirable aura about them that has resulted in them being spurned throughout their history by the rest of the realm. What is it about the Freys that has made the other great houses seemingly look down on them?" And someone, I've lost the question now, but I also had a question which asked whether there was a bit of jealousy going on here in this, because it is undeniably the case that the Freys are looked down on by other houses, by the older houses, the more established houses. Now, part of this is just the way of that life, and frankly lots of established cultures where sort of the people who've been around for a long time and the families and establishments have been around for a long time look down on everybody who's newer than them, and view them as being, not quite as proper, and that's what they are. And I think the fact is that the Freys then acted more like merchants, I guess you could say, than traditional ruling families, in the sense that they basically had a product, which was the bridge, that they sold access to. And that was not, therefore, the way of the other noble families of the world. I mean, the Starks, for example, they had Wintertown. This was almost like they have this kind of paternalistic view of looking after the North during the cold, hard winters of the North. Anyone could come and settle in this town just outside Winterfell and make use of the fact that there was shelter here, there was hot water here, there was food here. That kind of more paternalistic attitude is perhaps what a lot of the older houses were. The Freys were trying to make a quick buck. It's the kind of the feel that a lot of people often had. And from what we've seen, they didn't do themselves any favors with their kind of like shifting loyalties and waiting to see which way the wind blows. So all of that, I think, is what has contributed to their reputation. But is there a hint of jealousy to this? Perhaps. I think that certainly from the Riverlands, you could say that there's a lot of jostling for position amongst the Riverlands families, because compared to many of the parts of the Seven Kingdoms, there isn't such a clear house that's in charge of everyone else and is way ahead of everyone else. The Starks are clearly the biggest and most important house in the North. The Lannisters clearly the biggest and most important house in the Westerlands. The Martells clearly the biggest, and so on. When you come to the Riverlands, House Tully may have the most impressive titles, but they don't have the history of being kings of the Riverlands that several other houses do. They don't have the riches of the Freys, nor do they have the sort of the honor of someone like the Blackwoods. So there's a lot more sort of jostling of positions. Somehow the Freys have come from being nothing to being the second most powerful house in the Riverlands, and that means that they've kind of leapfrogged House Mallister. They've leapfrogged the Brackens and the Blackwoods. They're moving up whilst not playing the game in the way that the other noble families have been. So is there some jealousy? I think that's definitely a part of it, but the Freys have not helped themselves. Dr. Debunk saying, up jumped toll takers, not of noble blood. Yeah, I mean, that kind of sums it up, really. So let's go to a question from Matt Rubin, saying, happy weekend, Robert, and to you. House Frey is one of the more interesting houses in Westeros to me, but my question is about the area itself. How is it that in thousands of years, or however long it took until the twins finally rose up against the Green Fork, no other people thought of bridging over the Trident? And since their rise, do we know of anyone else who tried to emulate them and failed, or more surprisingly succeeded? Well, as we know from the map, no successful attempt has been made that survives to this day. It's probably fair to say that no one... well, there's a couple of points to make here. First of all, no one has ever done it because it's a really hard thing to do. And secondly, the Riverlands is not a stable place where you can do big infrastructure projects. Every time there's a war in Westeros, the heart of it is in the Riverlands. That's where most of the battles take place, in the Riverlands. So it's not really a stable place. Ironically, the Freys probably, although I'm saying this probably wasn't viewed at the time as being great land that they got, it's one of the safer parts in the Riverlands, because where are you going to go? If you're going to go up that far north, there's not really much else to go, many other places to go after that than, you're going to the neck. And do you really want to go to that horrible swampland? Not really. So the battles are fought south of there. So whereas the Freys had relative peace, because to the north they had a natural barrier, nobody's attacking them from there. The House Reed are happy where they are. The House Reed are not going to come attack them from the north, and from the south not many people are going to be pushing that far up. They had relative safety for a very long period of time, whereas in the Riverlands there was always, the southern Riverlands, there was always battles. So the kind of infrastructure project that took 3 generations to do, which is what we've got going on here with the Freys and their bridge, that's just not really possible. So that's why we have this big long gap all the way down there. And the other thing to note, actually, you can probably just, let's see, but we'll quickly put the map back up. You may or may not be able to see it easily, but although we talk about this is strategically important, if you wanted to go east-west, you have to go this way. There's actually not that many big settlements on the east coast there. So the King's Road, which sort of runs roughly parallel to the Green Fork, on the far side, for most of that section where there's no other crossings, you've got mountains. So it's not like there's a huge amount of this traffic. What this is, the main market for this is people coming from the western side who are heading north, and particularly from the sort of the northwest. So from places like River Run or Seaguard or somewhere like that, who are wishing to be heading north, or vice versa. That route there, that is where the important thing is. The amount of people trying to cross over the Green Fork midway between those 2 points is probably not that great. Okay, let's go to Kazigli Bay saying, I hope that Walder Frey's death in the books is absolutely horrific. Yeah, we'll talk about the end of the phrase in a little bit. But I do wonder sometimes whether, just as an offhand thing, whether George R. R. Martin might just let Walder Frey die in his sleep. It's a horrible thought, but some people have to. And when you think about who has just sort of like died like that, Maester Aemon is probably the only one. So is somebody else just going to randomly die? Quite possibly, and he is very old. So let's go to a question from Diego Godoy. Do you think House Frey would have betrayed the Starks if Robb had kept his marriage engagement? Yeah, I mean, this is linked to the question I was asked earlier. If he'd kept his marriage engagement, then, but everything else had happened, I think it's really a matter of which way Roose Bolton would have gone. So if he'd resisted the temptations with Jane Westerling, and instead got a bit better, and then realized that Tywin Lannister wasn't going to move west and just sort of like retreated back to River Run or something like that, probably Roose Bolton would have not seen the balance of power shift that much. I think the big question is whether at this point Robb Stark might have started just not retreating back up north, but just consolidating his position. Because if once the Lannisters and the Tyrells had formed their alliance, once Renly was out of the picture, once Stannis had been defeated and then headed up north, that led to a very different situation. And could Robb at that point realistically expect to be able to take King's Landing? I think no. And that's the point at which maybe he would try and consolidate. And if people like Roose Bolton thought that was possible, then he probably wouldn't rebel. And certainly the Freys wouldn't rebel without Roose Bolton. It's also worth pointing out the reason why Walder Frey wanted a wedding or a marriage with the Starks was because the Starks were incredibly important family, and more so when Robb Stark was king, because the Riverland lords, as well as the lords of the North, had all declared Robb a king. If he'd married a Frey, the Freys were suddenly royalty. And that's a very different thing to what the situation was when Robb had reneged on the promise, and suddenly the Freys not only not royalty, but they're in a much worse position than they were before. Stringer Studio saying, why did Walder pick Roslin, so fair to look at, for Edmure? Will Edmure, Roslin, and the baby survive? Right, so why Roslin? I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think it does depend on how cunning you think he is. It's very clear that Roslin knew at least the outline of what was going to happen. She, again, Cat being observant, notices this, that she's crying, basically. She's really upset through the wedding, and Cat's there. It looks more than just like nerves, pre-wedding nerves. Cat does figure it all out, but just a little bit too late. But why Roslin? Roslin is pretty. Edmure is happy to marry her. And I think that's actually quite important, because from Walder Frey's perspective, if he was going to have a wedding there, he wanted one where Edmure, if Edmure was like really grumpy and on edge, that would not help them. What he wanted was him out of the way, all of his troops as happy and relaxed as possible. He wanted, it was always going to be an awkward situation, but he would have wanted that to be as pleasant a situation as possible, with people being happy and getting drunk. So him putting a pretty person there for Edmure to marry is probably a good thing. Added to which, let's not forget the Freys, their loyalties can shift. And as much as we look at the Freys as now having completely thrown their lot in with the Lannisters, with the Boltons, it's noticeable that he didn't kill Edmure. And he kept, so Edmure is now a member of his family. And so he is now tied in to House Tully. And that's possible, just in case, on the off chance that things shifted again, suddenly he has got a member of his family married to the Tullys. So he is, and happily married to the Tullys, it would appear. Yeah, he's working on a few different levels here, I think, Walder Frey. He is very cunning, I think, not just sort of taking opportunities, just like, oh, well, I'll just kill them. I think he is thinking ahead quite a lot. Will they survive? I think so, probably. I mean, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't. Martin S saying, "Hi, Robert. The camera is focused on the background, not on your face." Okay. Apologies. It should auto-correct the camera. But hey, just when we're starting to get the sound issues right, if the video stops working, that's just the way. My lack of technical ability is coming through again. Oh, and then Martin Nass saying the focus is okay now. I hope you had a good week. I did have a good week. Thank you very much. DM Collins, why couldn't the Tullys just tell the Freys to march for Rob without concessions from Rob? Don't people normally have to obey their liege lords? Well, they do. And this is, this is the point, is that they should have done. But Walder Frey was just a master of procrastination. So Edmure, yes, he can say, you've got to come here. And then Walder Frey's like, yep, I'm just gathering my troops. We'll be there in a bit. Oh, just had a little bit of a problem here. And that's the delaying tactics that he's doing. It's never an open, outright refusal. It's always just playing around with it. And I think it's, they did enough to show willing. It's fair to say, so that the phrase, it's not that they just sat at the twins and didn't do anything. They did send a few people out who did intercept some Lannister outriders. So they were doing a decent job-ish. It was just not... and you could also argue that the Freys on their own probably wouldn't have been able to relieve the siege. So it's always kept in this kind of little grey area of, well, they are doing some things. The Tullys, simply put, didn't have the power or authority to order the Freys to do things and know that they would do them. That's where this power imbalance comes in, because the Freys, the Tullys were weakened, the Freys were in a position of strength, and they could use that. So that's what it is. Yes, they could have ordered them. They did order them, but the Freys were just too strong. Just Lane just realised, why was Edmure unwed for so long? It's an interesting question. It's a matter of who's eligible when you look around, because Edmure Tully is the heir. Who is he going to be wedding? And I'm not going to go through all of the noble families, but you would expect him to be wedding somebody at his level. You would expect him to be marrying the equivalent of like the Starks or the Lannisters or something like that. But who was there really? So there was no Arryn heir. The Starks, no. Because Lyanna was dead, and then you go down a generation. Sansa was the oldest there, but then she got betrothed off to Joffrey very quickly. Who could he have married from the Baratheons? They just had the three Baratheon boys, and was he going to be marrying Myrcella? Well, she was still very young, so the simple, straightforward answer is actually there wasn't really an obvious candidate. So he was probably always going to just have to marry who was most politically advantageous at a particular moment in time. And so a Frey, it's not a horrendous match. He grumbles about it, but he kind of accepts the political reality, and it's not a terrible match for him politically. let's go to Karkarsnak. Thank you. The camera's looking good on your end. Pleased to hear that. Charis Ballerina. After the Red Wedding, Walder Frey sends Cersei a letter claiming laying claim to several other castles, and she scoffs at the idea. What castles do you think he requested? I don't know. Quite a few in the Riverlands would be my guess. Basically, and this goes for Walder Frey's approach on like marrying off his family as much as anything else. He just seems to try stuff, just throw stuff out there. Maybe some of it will work. He tried to get he offered 3 different daughters to the Blackfish, Brynden Tully. He thought, I'll try and get somebody married into the Lannisters. He saw the opportunity to marry somebody to the Starks. The same as this here. He's just like, okay, so I've now got a chance. This is my one chance to try and grab some land, get some castles. Yes, Riverrun, definitely. He probably thinks that. I think there's probably a fair chance he might have gone for Seaguard being the next closest, sort of just to the southwest of him. Those I think would probably be the most obvious ones. The fact that Cersei does sort of dismiss this out of hand largely goes to show that then they don't really view, the Lannisters don't really view the Freys as being the most important. As I said earlier, I suspect Walder Frey thought that he might become Lord Paramount, and he didn't. The other interesting one, we'll talk about this relationship a bit more in a moment, but how about Greywater Watch? Or if not Greywater Watch, then Coleen. That would be an interesting kind of power grab from them. Question from Darius Hutchinson. Why does the Riverlands not have any Marcher Lords? Well, because the Riverlands... there are no marches, I think, is the short answer to this. So the marches technically is where you have 2 very clear established territories, and then an area in the middle that is kind of disputed land. And you therefore have a very strong, powerful martial force that stays there to try and control those lands. That's what the sort of the marshes are. So they appear in the Westerosi map around the edges of Dawn and the Stormlands and the Reach. So that's where the Marcher Lords are there, and this is where you get places like House Swan and also House Tarly, where you get these families with this great martial kind of tradition. Why is that not the case in the Riverlands? Because the Riverlands has not had a firm border for a long time. It's always the battles are going on all the time. Where do the Riverlands end? Who knows? Because sometimes you had the kingdom of the Isles and the rivers. You had the kingdoms of the Trident, kingdoms of the rivers, the hills and the rivers. It shifted all the time where these different borders were, and that's so you don't have a long established border with another established enemy. Incidentally, some of the inspiration for that probably comes from the English-Welsh border. So the Welsh Marches is a thing. There's a sort of a stretch of land between England and Wales where you would have these kind of Marcher Lords, where the English would be subjugating the pesky Welsh, and would try and have these really strong castles and have a strong military presence in those lands, stronger than they would slightly further into England. Jasper Lane saying, I disagree. It's not uncommon for lords paramount to wed high lords. Cregan married a Blackwood. Mace married a Hightower, and Doran married someone from Essos. Yeah, it's not uncommon, but you have to pick the right one. Is the answer. And certainly, if you look at what Hoster Tully, so this is Hoster who's deciding. Hoster's the dad here. He's clearly playing a political game where he's pitching this quite high. He had one of his daughters who was betrothed to the Stark heir, and then that fell through. He got her to marry the Lord Stark, and then he got his other daughter to marry Lord Arryn. So that's where he's pitching at. And if nothing came along, then I'm sure that they would have found a second tier family to marry. Carl Karsnark with the knowledge again. March or mark is an Anglo-Saxon word for borderland. A marcher lord would be a borderland. The Rohirrim live in the Riddermark as well. Yeah, absolutely, they do. Let's go to Robbie OB saying, yo, yo, yo. Joining late, but still wanted to send my love to all the geeks who have fallen in deep. Thank you very much for that. And IDG Andrew K saying, considering the well-established Lannister and Westerlands marriages with the Freys, wasn't it always a dodgy alliance for the Starks to rely on? Well, it was, but having paid a high price for it, I think that they probably felt that they could rely on it, and perhaps they could have done for as long as the fact that they kept to the deal. The other thing to probably note, sort of geopolitically, why might the Starks feel that the Freys would stay in line? The position of the twins, yes, it might feel like it's in a good sort of defendable position, but actually when you think Robb was king of the North and the Riverlands, what's right in the middle there? It's the twins. It actually would be, if they had turned against the Starks, they would have been surrounded by Robb's allies and subjects, basically. So as long as Robb was powerful, then the Freys would have to stay in line. Jenny of Oldstone saying, Moat Caitlin and Caitlin Tully, obviously connected. Please excuse my grammar because I have to use voice. Oh, well, that's not a problem at all. Moat Caitlin and Caitlin Tully are connected. I mean, I get the linguistic kind of link. I think it's noticeable that she, just trying to think about sort of her relationship with this, it's noticeable that she's the one who understands the purpose of this and the strength of it. When she arrives there with Brynden, Uncle Brynden, Tully the Blackfish, he's there going, this is just a pile of, a ruined castle. And he's supposed to be, and he is, an incredibly competent leader and fighter. And she's the one who's there saying, no, look at it, figure it out. This is a death trap for anyone coming from the south. So she actually instinctively gets it in a way that perhaps other people don't. Let's go to Matthew Hawkins. Dear Robert, has George R. R. Martin ever explained why the lords and ladies of Westeros were willing to marry their daughters off to Walder Frey? especially when he was an octogenarian with a reputation for being a dirty old man. This is an interesting question. Why on earth would you let your daughter marry Walder Frey? He's been married 8 times. And I think going at a high level, going through those 8 marriages, you can see, I think, the answer to that question. So when he married the first time, he will have been a young man. House Frey were powerful, second-tier house, and he married a Royce. And this seems like, just taken at face value, that seems like a reasonable political match. House Royce, similarly powerful over in the Vale, second tier, sort of below the Arryns, but still very strong and powerful. So that seems like a reasonable, and he was a young man at the time, and she may or may not have been particularly enamored with who he was, but that's just what marriages were like at the time. So that was the first one. The second marriage was to some. Now, House Swan are actually, they're one of these Marcher Lords that we were talking about a moment ago. They're from the Stormlands, and so they won't have. So they're a little bit further away. They won't have had too much contact with the Freys, but again, they're sort of roughly around there. Probably a touch less well known and renowned than the Royces, but still quite impressive. But so a second wife there, that kind of makes sense. The third wife was a Crakehall. Now the Crakehall, again, not from the Riverlands, this is from the Westerlands, and again you would say they're sort of a second tier house, but at that moment in time, probably, so this, we don't know the exact dates of all of these different weddings, but it's entirely possible this was during the time when the Lannisters were a bit less powerful, and there were some very powerful houses over in the Westlands, in houses like House Tarbeck, House Rain. So Crakehall was sort of like another little notch down. Then you get 3 Riverlands. The next 3 wives are all from the Riverlands. We start off with someone from the House Blackwood, who, again, it's just like maybe just a notch down if you're saying that House Frey are the second most powerful in the Riverlands, then it's a fair match, but it's maybe a notch down. Then you get House Went. House Went, at the time, they owned Harrenhal. They were also there recently. They gained Harrenhal as a house. They needed a bit of money, probably. Harrenhal, huge amounts of upkeep. Very prestigious, but huge amounts of upkeep. So that kind of makes sense. But again, that's another little notch down. After that, we have House Rosby, who, again, a famous house, but not as famous. Another little notch down. Then we get on to wife number 7. That is from House Faring. And then wife number 8 is House Ehrenford. Now, these are vassals of the Freys. So that's even further down. And actually, they probably didn't have huge amounts of choice in it. So if you just take that as a sort of a trajectory, in answer to your question, why would noble houses be willing to let their daughters marry the Freys? Well, the first answer is because there's probably money in it. We've seen certainly when Walder Frey married off a granddaughter to Roose Bolton, then there was a huge dowry that came with that. The idea, I think, that if House Frey is trying to get things, they've got the money, and if you've got an old house with prestige but less money, maybe you might think you might get some money out of this. So there's that layer to it. But fundamentally, if you're looking at the trajectory, you start off with a very strong house like House Royce, and by the end of it, by the time he is in his 80s, he is just marrying women from one of his own vassal houses. It's a slow decline in the political quality of his weddings, it's probably fair to say. So that's, I think, how you can get to understand how people were willing to marry him. Darius Hutchinson, is it dangerous for Walder to marry a Stark, considering Rob's son would become Lord of the Crossing and could lay claim to it and expand the north? Well, so the thing that he was marrying into was he was marrying a grand. They hadn't actually chosen exactly who it was going to be, but presumably a granddaughter to be marrying Robb Stark as Lord of Winterfell, Lord Paramount of the North. And so she would then, in the same way that Catelyn Tully went up and became Catelyn Stark, that was the same idea, was that then a Frey would go up and be the Lady of Winterfell. And it wouldn't then be a matter of their children would then claim the twins. That's not the way that the inheritance laws worked. But it would mean that House Frey would have a strong connection then with the Starks. Let's go to a question from Ninja Robbo. Hi, Robert. We hear there are many Freys across 4 to 5 generations. Someone said that Walder was the only lord in Westeros who could field an army from his own breeches. Yeah, which is a great line. But as we don't hear that they're big into incest, they must be married into very large numbers of other families. This seems at odds with their universal poor regard. Why are people marrying Freys if they're so hated? Are these insignificant families or even peasants whose opinion we don't hear about? Or is everyone doing a ruse and getting in on that fat Frey silver? Well, some are getting in on that fat Frey silver, as you say. Some, it's just he tries, and we said this. It's been in the chat before. You know, you throw enough darts in the direction of dartboard, eventually you'll get a bullseye. He just tried all the time to get his people married off, get his family married off. He suggested he went to the Blackfish. Do you want this daughter? You want this daughter? You want this daughter? And Blackfish was just blanket no to everyone, basically. But he tried marrying off people to the Lannisters, and he did that just at the right time. He managed to get one of a member of his family married off to the Lannister, Jenna Lannister, who we meet in the Dance with the Dragons. I forget which one. But when Jamie meets her, she's quite a cool character. But that came at a time when the Lannisters were quite weak, and Tywin's dad was in charge, and he said yes. And Tywin was like, I don't think this is a good idea, but the Lannisters were weak at the time. And so he just got lucky. So he just kept on trying and kept on trying and kept on trying, and eventually some things worked. If you go through the list of all of the people that the Freys are married to, it's quite broad. There's a lot of smaller families in the Riverlands, it has to be said. But yeah, a patchwork of other families around and about. And I think it's reasonable to say he just kept on trying. Robbie OB boosting Auntie Slayer. Oh, this is a question. I love it when people do this. Thank you very much. Very kind. Picking up a question for somebody else in the chat. How much has Walter Frey stunted the growth of the house? If he had died 40 years ago, do you think the house would have been able to get ahead? Seems they've been mostly stagnant with Walter in charge. Well, this is an interesting one because you use the word stagnant. That may or may not be the right word there, but that is the exact same thing for almost every house in Westeros. What realistically could the Freys do? How can they advance? The only way within the way the Seven Kingdoms was constituted, the only way for them to actually advance would be to become Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, which was basically what Walder Frey seemed to have been going for with the Red Wedding. That was what he was hoping for. Other than that, they had to make themselves the second most powerful family in the Riverlands, which is what he achieved. So, what was he holding them back? I mean, it's hard to say that there's any other family in the Riverlands during that period, from the period when the Targaryens invaded and they made the Tullys Lord Paramount. From that moment on, who gained the most out of all of those families in the Riverlands? I mean, you could possibly argue maybe House Went when they gained Harrenhal. They went up in the world then, but that didn't last very long. The Blackwoods, the Brackens, they were roughly in the same position politically they were before. The Mallisters similarly. So I would argue that within the bounds of what was possible, they actually did all right politically under him. And they showed their power, and they showed how all right they were doing by all of the tricks that Walder Frey pulled off. Him not turning up on time for the Battle of the Trident, if his house had been any weaker, he would have not got away. He would have not got away with that. He got away with it because his house was strong compared to the Tullys. So I think he did. I mean, on pure political grounds, I think he did all right. Zach K, welcome. Good to see you. I'll use this as just a moment, actually, just while I'm pausing, to say, moderators, this is the proper mod love. I did a brief mod love earlier. Moderators, thank you. You do an amazing job. If you're here in the chat, the reason why this is such a safe, uplifting, hopefully, place for you is because the moderators do a fantastic job. Just getting rid of any of the spam there, providing links to stuff, making people feel welcome. Please do show them a little bit of love. I would hugely appreciate it. The other big thank you is my patrons. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon. I can't do what I do without your support. So patrons, thank you. I hugely appreciate you. Things just to announce quickly happening on the main channel. I've got, I always forget what video I've coming out tomorrow. I've got one coming out, I think probably next week. I thought I would succumb to a video that I've been meaning to do for a long time, which was is Stannis the true king? So many people say, oh, Stannis is definitely the true king. I just thought, well, let's just address it. Is he the true king? That's coming out, I think, in about a week's time. I can't remember what I've got coming out, but I'd probably just spoil it if I could remember. So there's a video coming out tomorrow. I can't remember what it is. Michelle Raimo saying, breaking news from the Hollywood Reporter: Aegon's conquest from HBO officially in development. The writer of the Batman 2 Mattson Tomlin, has been tapped to write it. Oh, well, that's very exciting. Aegon's conquest officially in development. I'm kind of tempted at this moment just to very quickly see if that I can find a link to that. See if I can do I can't see it. Here we go. Oh, well. I've got Well, shout out to Redanian Intelligence for being the first thing I could see on X announcing this. HBO is developing an Aegon's Conquest series with Matson Tomlin. A source is describing the project as taking a back to basics approach. Okay, so this is interesting because first of all, Aegon's Conquest. If you're, we'll come back to House Frey in just one moment, but let's just quickly deal with this. So Aegon's Conquest was always rumored as the next thing that they might do. Within the kind of the Targaryen history, there was a wondering whether this was going to be maybe under the banner of House of the Dragon, making this a kind of an anthology thing. It makes complete sense from the perspective of HBO's approach thus far has been, since they decided to abandon Blood Moon, the first idea they had for a spin-off, they've wanted to do things where they have already got completed material from George R.R. Martin. Feel free to insert your own commentary on as to why that might be after what happened with Game of Thrones. But the attraction for them of doing the Dance of the Dragons was he's written about it in Fire and Blood. The attraction for them of doing Dunk and Egg is that he's written the first 3 Dunk and Egg stories. And the attraction here is that he has written about Aegon's Conquest. So that's already there. There's no people trying to make up what might happen, fill in huge gaps. There will be some gaps, obviously, that they will have to fill in, but the main storyline is there, and presumably George R. R. Martin is going to be involved here. The second interesting thing there is the fact that if this is a series, pardon me, there was a rumor at a time that they were looking at this potentially as being a film, a movie. They would do the Conquest perhaps as a film, and then do maybe a series afterwards, which focuses more on the Sons of the Dragon, which being the Aenys and Maegor, leading into the sort of the first Targaryen succession crisis. So if they're thinking about making this a series, that implies that they're not going to go down that film route. They're just going to go, which I'm quite happy with. I thought that was quite ambitious, doing as a film the entire Conquest. The back to basics approach, I don't know if I understand what that means, to be honest. That's, I mean, what's a back to basics approach on Aegon's Conquest? It feels a bit like Game of Thrones, but they kind of stuck with that kind of feel for House of the Dragon. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure there. Aegon II as Batman, question mark, says Greet Weirwood. Who will play Aegon? Well, now is your time, everyone. Feel free to fan cast this. I'll read out a few ideas here. Michelle Ramos saying HBO is going to keep us fed with the Song of Ice and Fire content year and year for a bit. I'm so happy. So yeah, my instinct here is that they are going for something along the lines of every year we're going to have something Game of Thronesy, a Song of Ice and Fiery. We've got this year we're going to have House of the Dragon. Next year we will have Dunk and Egg season 1. I think that they will then have alternate House of the Dragon and Dunk and Egg. If they're starting production or starting to develop it at this stage, that means that we're not going to see that for another. It's not going to be on our screens for another 3 years at least. I wouldn't have thought. They will. They're not going to rush this. They're very aware of the fact that they've got a franchise that people love, but is potentially quite precarious. Okay. Few quick things in the chat. Alan Richson, I don't know that name. Henry Cavill, Jasper Lane suggesting his name comes up a lot. A lot of people saying Henry Cavill in the chat. But yeah, he will probably be busy with Warhammer 40k, which he's exec producing and probably starring in whenever it happens. And he's also got various other things on the go. He's going to do Highlander. He's my general feel. Henry Cavill seems his career approach seems to be to only pick things that not one-offs, but he could make a whole series of. He's done The Witcher, he's done Superman, Highlander, Warhammer 40k. He's always picking things that might turn into a franchise or already are a franchise. So he's got a few things on the go. Andrew K saying Conquest era is gold to adapt from, in my opinion. Has it all for me? Action, intrigue, different state of the realm, and many unanswered questions. Yeah, we will get. I mean, this is one of the things which we will definitely get is more on Aegon's dream, the Song of Ice and Fire, which will be fantastic if we can get a little bit more clarity on that, because we will come back to House Frey in a moment, but my mind's buzzing on this one now. If we get, if we look at what we've got, it's still not very clear. But by which I mean, we've been told that this is the basis on which Aegon, or the motivation for which, but on which Aegon invaded. But what exactly did he see? Well, we've got what Viserys said to Rhaenyra, but that's at least third or fourth hand that he's got that. And by word of mouth, not written down, it would appear. So is that exactly what he saw, or did he see something slightly different? How does this match up to the Prince that was promised thing, and the cat's paw dagger, what will become the cat's paw dagger, what was written, inscribed on that? How does that all tie together? I don't know, but I'll look forward to finding out. Auntie Slayer, who are the most respected Freys in the realm? Not from a sense of power, but widely thought highly of. They're oft perceived as weak, dumb, or unserious. Yeah, they are. I mean, there are a few. There's Hostine Frey, who's generally seen as one of the more capable ones. There's also Black Walder. We've not mentioned Black Walder yet. There's a lot of Walders. It's probably worth just pointing out this. A lot of members of the family named their children Walder in order to try and gain favor from the patriarch, Walder Frey himself. And as a result, there's lots, which shows quite how this is all about him. And he is the glue that keeps all of this together. But in order to distinguish between these, most of these different Walders have got some kind of little moniker. There's Big Walder and Little Walder. We'll talk about them in a bit as well. Black Walder, he's got black hair, but also he's got a black heart. So he's quite the character. The legends about him are manifold. When we get that Merrett Frey POV chapter, and he's there sort of like going through in his head all of the rumors about, he sleeps with all of the wives of all of his family members, and this calls into question the legitimacy of all of these different Freys. And he's something like third in line now to inherit. So there's actually a possibility that he could take leadership of the Freys. He's the person who went over to the Malisters to Seaguard and basically got them to surrender. He's I don't know whether he's respected, but he's given I mean, you say not a sense of power, but thought highly of. He's not widely thought highly of, but he's definitely not weak, dumb, or unserious. he's taken seriously by people. Charis Ballerina, what's the likelihood of the theory that Black Walder sleeps with all of his brothers and nephews' wives to muddy paternity and give himself a better claim? Yeah, so we were just talking about this. I think it's entirely possible that, I mean, we don't know. We've not really met him, to be honest. We've heard more about him than we've actually seen him. So we don't know. The fact that this is discussed as a real possibility seems to imply that probably, at least in one instance, that may well be the case. Certainly some of the ones that Merrett seems to be pretty convinced of it. So I think there's a fair chance. Not everyone that is ascribed to him, and perhaps not in terms of giving himself a better claim, but I think that in terms of sort of like one-upmanship, he seems to, his image seems to be quite important to him, and if he can show himself, cuckolding various people, then that's that sort of shows him to be powerful. So I think that's the motivation as much as anything else. I don't think he would say, actually, all of these children are mine. I don't think that's really where he's going to sort of go. Let's go to Robbie OB saying, how about Will Poulter for Aegon? Yeah, I mean, I think Aegon, he should be quite well built. He should look like a fighter, but also be a thinker as well. So it's quite a. It's not. It's not sort of like the Maegor kind of like hugely big and bulky guy, but he should definitely look like he's a strong fighting type. Let's go to Commander Ray. When we see the Freys, even the children, they're bullies, even to Bran, and have an absurdly high opinion and pride. What do you of themselves and pride? What do you think the root reasons for this are? Being looked over as the Riverlord by Aegon, or is it Walder Frey or something else? And Corvus Corax saying House Frey is old and has a consistent source of income. Where does the sense of poverty and overall disrespect originate from? I mean, what makes them like they are, I think, is this question, because it is very clear that the phrase as a whole, there is a disrespect towards other families, which you get from the Targaryens, you get from the Lannisters, but they're big and powerful families, more so than the Freys. The Freys seem to not respect authority at all. So where does this come from? Well, I think part of it is a reaction to how they themselves have been treated. They are treated as this kind of upstart toll collectors, and if people are going to treat them like that, then they might as well treat other people like that. But also, I feel that there's something about House Frey that is, they just keep getting away with it, and I think that has led to this kind of feeling that they're slightly above all of this. The rules don't apply to them. They were there at the heart of the Second Blackfire Rebellion, and somehow they managed to escape scot-free from that. They turned up late for Robert's rebellion. No repercussions from that whatsoever. Basically ignored a direct order. Then they've had the Red Wedding. No huge repercussions from that so far. The feeling is that the Fraser, they just, it's going to be okay. We'll get away with it. We don't have to kowtow to anyone, because nobody has ever come at us and just defeated us and turned us over. And it's true, they haven't. No, the Freys have not had that kind of humbling defeat at any point in their history. People haven't outright come and attacked them. So I think that's probably where it comes from. And partly from recently, the character of Walder Frey himself, he is House Frey, and he has this court around him. I think they showed this reasonably well on the TV show, is that it's just you get ushered into his court, and then you've got all of the family around him, and he just sort of like tells you go away now. Yes, even you. He's the one in charge, and everyone knows that he's the one in charge, and he's just dismissive of everything. In his world, he is in charge of his crossing, and it doesn't matter who you are, he's going to try and make you pay. Let's go to Callie Summers saying, pour one out for the Frey women. They largely seem pretty decent, capable and reasonable, but they're likely to be slaughtered by Lady Stoneheart for the sin of being a Frey. Or am I missing some darker stories of the Frey women that match the men? Yeah, so the Frey women, we don't see much, particularly compared to some of the houses we've been looking at over recent weeks, like House Blackwood, House Mormont, where the women almost take a bigger role than the men do. Here, no. The Frey women are, I mean, he has got a lot more sons than he does daughters, Walder Frey. It's noticeable. But there aren't many powerful Frey women. It is, in probably the very truest sense of the word, a very patriarchal house. He is the patriarch of it, and it all comes down through him. And then following the line of succession from him, because there are so many people, then the chances of there being a woman inheriting are zero. There's always going to be a next man in line. But in terms of Lady Stoneheart, there's an interesting twist here. Lady Stoneheart clearly wants revenge. She clearly is not particularly discriminating in the revenge. When we had Arya on the TV show, Arya taking vengeance on House Frey, it was noticeable that she killed all the men, not the women. She deliberately stopped I can't remember who it was supposed to be. Maybe it was Walder Frey's wife or someone. Stopped them from drinking the wine. So the women survived. Now, why is that? Is that some kind of thing that George R. R. Martin said to them that they were trying to reflect? I don't know. But there is a noticeable thing here, that when we get Lady Stoneheart introduced, and the quote comes, a description of what she wants is, she wants her son alive, or the men who killed him dead. She wants to feed the crows like they did at the Red Wedding. And I don't know how literal that is. The men who killed him dead. She clearly, just on a plain text reading of that, she does not hold the women accountable. Does that mean that she's going to deliberately only kill men, not women? Well, so far it has just been the men. So we have to see whether that's the case. We'll get into the whole retribution and fate of House Frey in just a moment or two, but I think we can touch on this by saying that I don't think we're looking at just a Red Wedding 2.0 or a Arya coming in and killing everybody in one go. There may well be a big event, but it's not just that. And that means that it's going to be slightly more picking and choosing who's going to be killed. Charis Ballerina saying, love George R. R. Martin for making the Frey sigil a double crossing. Yep, absolutely. Kill Max saying, I don't think Book Arya is going to make those kinds of distinctions. Andrew K saying, speaking of growth and expansion of the house, as much as I dislike Walder, have to give him credit there with so many marriages and alliances, even got Riverrun and Darry via his treachery. Yeah, it's true. I mean, he was definitely been playing the game. Ty Farnsworth saying, hi Robert, my question today is about the succession of House Frey. If a massacre at the twins were to happen in the books, as it did in the show, who is next in line to inherit the twins? And more importantly, where does that leave the rulership of the Riverlands? Well, the first part of that, who's next in line, there's always going to be someone next in line. And I think it's hard to state quite how many Freys there are, just coming from Walder Frey himself. That normally there's, if you go online, you can find there's like a excellent, it has to be said, a Song of Ice and Fire wiki with pages for different families and the like, and you can go to any of these normally when you get into these families and you get a family tree, and sometimes it's quite a big family tree and sometimes it's quite a small family tree. So for example, in House Reed, the only bit of family tree that we had were 4 names. When you get to House Frey, the family tree is so big that they had to cut it up into like 5 or 6. Here's the family tree of the first son of Walder Frey. Here's the family tree of the second son of Walder Frey. That's how big it is. They had to break it down into 5 or 6 different sections. There is always going to be another Frey next in line. It's a matter of whether or not whoever does that deed, if such a deed happens, would allow the Freys to take over. In terms of the second part of that question, where does this leave the rulership of the Riverlands? The Freys are not ruling the Riverlands at the moment, and nobody thinks that they are. Right now, technically, according to the Lannisters, Littlefinger is ruling the Riverlands. But Rob, according to Rob's will, Jon Snow does. Entirely bizarrely, if you just purely take it on the grounds of Rob's will, he has legitimized Jon and made him king, or made him his heir, which makes him king of the North and the Riverlands. Lady Stoneheart probably doesn't agree with that will. Thinks that Arya is alive, probably thinks that Arya rules the Riverlands. Lots of people think different things about who actually rules the Riverlands. So it won't become clear until at the very end of the story. I imagine that for certainly the next couple of books, we're just going to have a complicated story with lots of different people claiming it. Rassler, why had Walder Frey not already sent men to reinforce Edmure Tully? The Riverlords were besieged. Had Edmure not called his banners? And if he had, why did he not punish the Freys for ignoring his call? Well, he wasn't strong enough. And the Freys were doing things. And the decision was slightly tempered. Yes, he had called the banners, but at the same time, he'd recognized the fact that the Riverlands as a whole were currently being attacked by the Lannisters, not just besieging Riverrun. The Mountain, people like that were just going across the Riverlands, burning down farms, destroying villages, that kind of thing. And so Edmure wasn't, or Hoster, I guess, really at the start, technically, wasn't about just saying, everybody come here and defend me. He also cared about their own lands. And so it wasn't a blanket, everybody come here this moment, kind of calling the banners. It was more, we're now at war. Okay. Let's go to Vance. Hello, Robert. Would you agree? This is a question I answered earlier. I couldn't find who asked this. This was you, Vance, saying, would you agree that some of the disdain the House Frey receives prior to the Red Wedding is due to jealousy? I answered that one a little bit earlier, so I hope that one's okay for you. Michelle Rimo saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope all is well with you and Dan the dog." It is, thank you. My question is, do you think the Freys are capable of being loyal to anyone, or is treachery in their nature? A lot of the older houses in Westeros call the Freys up-jumped toll collectors and seem to have disdain for them. I wonder if the Freys know that, which is why they're willing to seemingly betray anyone and everyone. Also, little Walder Frey constantly catching strays from Duncan the Mystery Knight might be the funniest thing I've read. Yeah, it's great when every time he sees little, young Walder Frey, he just in his mind thinks, "What a horrible child." So, I think, Michelle, I've answered a bit about this earlier as well. But are they responding? Is their reaction and willingness to betray people in response to how they've been treated? I think partly yes. It has to be. They have never been welcomed. If they'd been welcomed in to court effectively and say, "Oh yes, you're now one of us, you're our equal," would they have and made friends rather than being always trying to wheedle their way up in the world? Would they have been the same? Probably not. It probably would have been different. Okay. Stephen's saying, "Hi Robert, hope all is well. Do you think the fall of House Frey will be different in the books than in the TV series? It seems to me that the Freys must be a powder keg of mistrust, rivalries, and hostility. When Walder finally dies, perhaps they will collapse into a bloody free-for-all for the succession, resulting in a stalemate where two rival Freys each control one of the twin castles, like, say, Edwin and Black Walder. Do you think that seems possible?" I do. So I'll answer the bigger picture about the sort of the fate of the Freys in just one moment. But Walder Frey dying is definitely on the cards, and there will be some Freys left afterwards. I think that's also quite clear. This idea of there being a Frey civil war, lots of people have suggested this over the last few years, simply because there are so many Freys who want to be the heir, want to be lord. This seems to be a part of their culture, that a lot of them are very aware of where they are in the line of succession, who needs to die in order for them to move up, jockeying for position. So it seems entirely possible and likely that you might get a couple of people, although the technical line of succession is quite clear. The idea that you might have this Frey civil war, I think, is quite strong. What will be interesting, though, is who's going to be left, which is what we'll cover in just one moment, because when Walder's gone, I think you will find that a huge amount of Freys are going to die relatively early in the story, in the Winds of Winter, and so it's a matter of who's going to be left. If we're going to have a Frey civil war, who actually is there? I mean, I think Black Walder is a reasonable bet. He's been developed as quite an interesting character, who does seem to be very ambitious. So I think that's entirely possible. Edwin as well, maybe. Stephen also asking, how strategically important do you think the twins will be in the story going forward, with future battles, or even if the others reach the Riverlands? I ask because they seem to have a fatal flaw in their design. While House Frey is united, they can defend against an outside attacker and control the crossing. But if two rivals each control one of the castles, they cannot attack each other over the bridge, and the bridge becomes permanently closed. If this happens, like in the scenario from the first question, then the Trident would be uncrossable for hundreds of miles. Yes, I think is the short answer. That it's if one the twins were held by two separate forces, that would make it pretty much uncrossable. The thing I would want to pick up on, you're sort of saying how strategically important will they be? I think when it comes to the others, if the others come that far south, I think actually the twins will stop being important, because the others and the long night brings it's not just a bit of cold, not just a bad winter. This is supernatural freezing. When the first long night happened, we're told that the River Royne froze all the way down almost to the very end. That's the kind of freezing which could freeze the Green Fork River. We're told that when there was a particularly cold winter, just after the year of the full spring, that the Blackwater rush down to King's Landing was freezing. If you get that, then you have to say, no matter how deep or fast running or wide the river is at the Twins, there's a fair chance that it could freeze over. And the moment you get a frozen over river, then the bridge actually suddenly becomes less important. So I think that this is one of those places that is important now, and it's important in sort of normal business. But if we get to the others, frankly, if we get to dragons, then a bridge is not as important anymore. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura, by the way, saying there have always been tensions between House Frey and House Reed. And you gave the example of the Knight of the Laughing Tree, which I don't think I've mentioned actually yet. You get in the tourney at Harrenhal, when Howland Reed is being picked on by those three squires, and then Lyanna Stark comes in and saves him. One of those three squires is a Frey squire. So one of the knights that the Knight of the Laughing Tree defeats is a Frey. So this is just like a random example of the rivalry between the Freys and the Reeds. You also see that in Winterfell when Jadrian and Mira come up there, and we've got Big and Little Walder Frey who are also up there. They really don't like them. They call them mudmen. They've got an incredibly low view of them. The other thing to note is kind of like a throwaway comment. I think it was in the World of Ice and Fire, where the Freys have at least once attempted to take Moat Cailin. And I find this fascinating because we were talking a little bit earlier about this idea that, yes, the Twins is strategically important. They can control... they can charge people for crossing the river, but the biggest access road, the only access road to the north and from the north to the south, is the King's Road. And there is a natural pinch point where the only way you can go is through the King's Road, through Moat Cailin. If someone controls Moat Cailin, they can control who goes through. And if you set up a toll booth there, you could do a roaring trade. Absolutely. So I do wonder whether the House Frey thought, oh, well, we could try and take that. That would just add, we could then control the entirety of that part of Westeros, and nobody can go either way without paying us a little toll. I could imagine that being their thought. And then they thought, well, who are these people protecting it? Who's this House Reed with their spears and their nets? And we should be able to defeat them. Obviously, House Reed defended themselves. The Freys lost, and I think that grates with them. So that's the kind of like the history. How will this get resolved? I mean, I'm not sure it will in any real sense. I think that House Reed as represented by Howland, will come and show that they're a hugely important part in the story. And the phrase will diminish. So I think that House Reed will prevail, but I don't think it will be structured as a sort of a this is the resolution of a struggle between those two families. Carl Karsnark saying the notion of the neck being the logistical choke point on the map is more great George R. R. Martin-y wordplay and symbolism. Yeah, absolutely. The Raven's Oath saying, hello, Robert. Apologies, but I cannot make it to the live stream this evening. My question is this. Who killed little Walder Frey? A handful of individuals would have a motive or perceived gain, but I wonder if it's Ramsay to get tensions more frayed. Pun intended there, I think. Okay, so George R. R. Martin loves his murder mysteries. The story of A Song of Ice and Fire is littered with these murder mysteries. Who killed this person? Why? This is one that happens right towards the end of the story that we have. It's up in Winterfell. Winterfell is a powder keg, really, at this point. The Boltons are there. They've claimed, they're now bosses of the North. They've got their allies. The Freys are there. And also up there are a few random northern families, in particular the Manderleys, who have been summoned. Lord Wyman Manderley himself has been summoned to bend the knee, basically. And Roose Bolton is very aware that there's a lot of these northern houses around him who, although they have to say that they're loyal, actually aren't. So it's this, and outside Stannis is camped a few days outside, just shivering to death at the moment, but waiting his chance to attack. There's lots going on there. I'm not going to cover everything that's going on there, but one of the things that is happening is that inside Winterfell, there's all these tensions going on between all these different parties, and there's a series of murders. And this is the fifth of the murders. And it is little Walder Frey. Now, this is one of the two. We got little Walder Frey and big Walder Frey, who were the two Freys who got sent up to be fostered at Winterfell, if you remember, as part of this original agreement that they had. So we get to meet them a few times. They're not really very nice people, it has to be said. Big Walder Frey is little, and little Walder Frey is big. So in your mind, if you're thinking of little Walder Frey as being quite small, actually this is the big person, physically large. And what happens is that we get Hostine Frey bursts into the main hall, the Great Hall, carrying with him the body of big Walder Frey. He's followed by little Walder Frey. He carrying the body of little Walder Frey, and big Walder Frey follows him in. And it's like, who's killed this guy? He's been stabbed. He's dead. And we're sort of left to follow the action, which moves quite quickly. There are a few clues, which I shall come back to in just one moment. But the action basically follows where he's there, and Hostine basically says, we know who did this. It's obvious who did this. It has to be Wyman Manderley. We know that he hates us. And Wyman Manderley basically in quite a, we can probably call it a boss move. He says, to be truthful, I don't really know much about this guy, but perhaps it was a mercy, because if he'd grown up, he was only 9, this kid. If he'd grown up, then he would have grown up to be a Frey. So perhaps it's a mercy that he got killed. At which point the Freys suddenly pile into the Manderleys, and the Manderleys fight back, and the Boltons have to just basically pull them apart. And Roose Bolton says, "Okay, I can tell both sides here, you're itching for a fight. Stannis is just outside the door. So, Freys, Manderleys, get on your horses, head out there, attack them." Which is quite a clever way for Roose Bolton sort of get rid of the people who he doesn't really trust, and send them out to try and defeat somebody who is trying to attack him. He's done that before, but that's quite a clever way of doing it. But this does slightly distract from who did kill little Walder Frey. Now, Theon is there, and he's like stood next to one of the Mance Rayder is there, disguised as Abel the Bard, and he's got these spearwives who are disguised as washerwomen, and then Theon kind of looks at them because he's pretty sure that they've been going around murdering people, and the woman next to him just sort of like, it wasn't us, not that one. So it's pretty clear it's not them. Some people say maybe this was Ramsay, as you've suggested. Perhaps this was Ramsay. Perhaps he was, because he'd been getting quite close with little Walder Frey. Little Walder Frey had been trying to ingratiate himself with Ramsay. He'd been copying his behaviors. Maybe Ramsay had thought, I just want to cause a bit of trouble here. I'm just going to kill him for my own pleasure. Maybe, as you say, he wanted to provoke a fight with the Manderleys. But I think the big clue is blazingly obvious, in that when they come in, Hostein's there, and he's got little Walder Frey, and we're told that there's blood on the body, but it's all frozen. And Hostein puts down the body, and the snow comes off of him. Snow falls off of him. However, big Walder Frey, we're told that he's got spatters of blood all over his chest and his arms and his hands. Now, the assumption from everyone seems to be, he must have got that by sort of helping pick up the body or something. But the blood froze very quickly. It's really cold outside in Winterfell, really, really cold. Snowdrifts, tens of feet high, tens of meters high even. There's the blood froze on the body very, very quick. So the clear implication is that big Walder Frey was at the very least around the body at the time it was killed. So is there any hint that maybe he is capable of doing this? Well, we know that he never really liked little Walder Frey. And he liked him even less as he was getting closer and closer to Ramsay. We also know that he's been thinking about, he's very aware of the line of succession and where he is and who's between him and sort of moving up. And little Walder Frey is one of those people who he would have to get out of his way. And he did in a kind of like a really offhand way. There were 3 Freys who got sent over to Wyman Manderley to go and bring him back. And they all mysteriously died on their way back. And Wyman Manderley was like, I don't know what happened to them. That's a mystery how they died. Big Walder Frey's like, of course that was Wyman Manderley. Of course he had them. He hates the Freys. Of course he had them killed. It's what I would have done. And it's like, that's so you're thinking about that as the the sensible option is to be killing your political opponents. So my take is that unless we get any more information based purely on what we have, the most obvious person is Big Walder Frey. Let's go to a question from Sam A. Saying, hello, Robert. If Walder Frey dies, which is likely, there might be a Frey succession crisis, which would mean 3 very different succession crises could dominate the Winds of Winter. One solved by compromise, the Starks, one by war, the Targaryens, and one by backstabbing, the Freys. Do you think this might be intentional by George R. R. Martin? Yeah, well, quite possibly. I think he does like a good succession crisis. I mean, I think I would agree certainly with the Starks that their succession crisis will be dealt with ultimately by the Starks talking to each other and figuring out who actually wants to be in charge here. I think the Targaryen one, such as it is, will be Dany and Fagon. Whether that's in the Winds of Winter or whether that actually has to wait until the Dream of Spring, I don't know. How will that be dealt with? I mean, with fire and blood, I think is probably the honest answer. The Frey one, yeah, with backstabbing. I don't think, however, George R. R. Martin will kind of hold these 3 up in some kind of comparison. The Starks and the Targaryens, this is a Song of Ice and Fire. It's not a Song of Ice and Fire and bridges over a big river. This is, and so he would hold up those 2 succession crises, perhaps, and compare them, not except in a by way of a contrast. This is what the Freys are like way. So yes, I think it's entirely possible, but I don't think he would hold it up there. Ranabir Mitra saying, salutations to you too, sir. I hope you're keeping well. Won't be able to join you, but we'll watch on the rewatch. Love to the mods nonetheless. A slightly speculatory question. Could you theorize or speculate on what Walder Frey did with Robb Stark's remains, head and wolf head body, post-Red Wedding? Joffrey asked for it, but there was no further mention. Lady Stoneheart might perform a Red Wedding 2.0 at Riverrun in the Winds of Winter and may stumble upon these remains when sacking the twins. Could she procure those remains and send them to Winterfell to be buried in the crypts? I don't know what purpose this would serve for the remaining plot, but maybe this is how she moves north post doing her deeds in the Riverlands. Okay, so I will leave the kind of the Red Wedding 2.0 for another question in just one moment. But Robb Stark's remains. This is a bit of a mystery because he was killed at the twins. We have these anecdotal reports which sound right, that they then chopped off his head, they chopped off Grey Wind's head, they put Grey Wind's head on his shoulders, they put the crown on there, and then they paraded that round and mocked it. Now, that sounds possible. But what happened after that? Yes, Joffrey asked. He wants Robb Stark's head. He wants to be able to put it on a spike and have this is a pretender destroyed kind of thing. That doesn't seem to happen. It doesn't show up. So they obviously have either kept it or just got rid of it without thinking about anything. There's a couple of sort of passing references to the idea that the crows had the bodies. So the small folk apparently say that. Lady Stoneheart is interpreted as saying, I want to feed the Frey's bodies to the crows, like what they did at the Red Wedding, seeming to imply that was what was happened there. So what could they have done with Cat's body? They did a mockery of Tully funeral by just throwing it in the river. So they mocked it, and then they didn't really care it was just like, oh, it's gone then. I kind of feel that's probably what happened with Robb Stark's body. They used it for their mockery, which they did, and then it's just they kind of just left it out somewhere. So this idea that it was just left for the crows, that feels right. I mean, it's kind of anticlimactic. Does it feel right that they might have carefully collected the body and the bones and preserved them in some way that some future person could come to the twins and go, here's Robb Stark's bones, we'll do something. That doesn't feel like Walder Frey's way. So unless somebody came in and did it, no. The crown, incidentally, the crown gets taken by a son of Walder Frey, and then he just gave it to a prostitute, a sex worker. And I think that shows the kind of disdain that they had for all of that. If they'd wanted to do something symbolic, then they could have done that. But it was just who wants that? Oh, you have that kind of thing. That probably what happened with this body. I think it's just going to be not anticlimactic, but not a thing. Let's go to Tazta saying, I know we all love House Frey, but what do you think will happen to them in the end? More specifically, do you think it'll play out like it did in the show with Arya, or do you think Lady Stoneheart will get to them first? And Maura Lee also asking, on the show it was Arya who took down Lord Frey and all of the men left in the house. What do you see as House Frey's fate in the books? Do you see Lady Stoneheart being the key to this? I'm also going to pull in this Red Wedding 2.0 question that I had a little bit earlier. So what is the fate of House Frey? Well, the first thing to say is that there's obviously lots of House Frey, and they are dotted about the Seven Kingdoms at the moment. So they're not all going to be gatherable in one individual location to all be killed in one fell swoop. So that, I think, is the first thing. The second is, it's worth noting that there are many, many Freys, but many of them have already been killed. It's not just going to be like this. Revenge is not just one event. This is, and it started, and it will carry on, I feel sure, into the Winds of Winter, that Freys are going to be dying in their 1s, 2s, and 3s all over the place. Already, we have those, I mentioned them earlier, the 3 Freys who went off to Wyman Manderley, and they mysteriously died on the way back. He definitely killed them. We've got Little Walder, who we were talking about a moment ago. He's dead. We've got 3, I think, who are dead, who have been killed by the Brotherhood Without Banners. 1 more, Cleos Frey, got killed by random bandits, outlaws. We've got 3 who died at the Red Wedding itself. This was not just a one-sided massacre. That Freys died in it as well. So when you start adding them up, we're already on what 8 or so who've been killed just already in dribs and drabs here and there. And it's very clear that as far as Lady Stoneheart's concerned, when there's a Frey travelling through what she will consider her lands, then they're dead. She will kill them. So that, I think, is the first thing to say, is that this is not just one event. There's going to be lots. There's already lots of Freys have been killed. There will be more Freys killed in the future, individually. And then the second thing is this Red Wedding 2.0 idea. Lots of people have come to this because the Freys have lots of weddings because they're always marrying people. And there's one in particular that is looking likely and has a little bit of foreshadowing with it that makes you go, okay, if it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen there. And that is with Devon Lannister. Now, he wasn't on the TV show, so many people aren't particularly aware of him. He's a Lannister cousin. He comes across as very competent. Jamie rates him highly. He's got a link across to the Freys already, in that his father was killed in Jamie's attack on the Westerlands, and he said, "I'm going to grow my hair until." Actually, it was the Carstarks. I'm going to grow my hair until I get a chance to get my revenge. And then Rickard Karstark got killed by Robb Stark, but he carried on growing his hair, which means he's now got these long flowing locks, big beard, big, strong, muscular guy. And as part of the deal that the Lannisters have got with the Freys, he's been promised to a Frey. Again, it's left vague. The Freys seem to do this a lot. Say, well, you can marry one of it. You can pick, or we'll pick. Who it is matters less. And he is now so significant a character. He is actually now the Warden of the West, which is the title that is in normal peace times held by the Lord of Castle Rock. So he's now quite a significant figure. Jamie reminds him of the fact that he has to be marrying a Frey at some point, and he says this: "I'll wed and bed my stoat." That's how he refers to the phrase. "I'll wed and bed my stoat, never fear. I know what happened to Robb Stark." Now, this is clearly meant by him as a I'm not going to renege on my promise, because I know if you say you're going to marry a Frey and then you don't, bad things happen to you. But also, you could read this the other way, in a kind of a foreshadowing way. He knows what happens. He knows what happens to Robb Stark, and that's going to happen to him. He's going to get married to a Frey. Now, how and when might this happen? Well, potentially. The Lannisters are now technically in charge of Riverrun at this moment in time, but there is a Brotherhood Without Banners, Tom of Seven Strings plant in there, so they have got they've got a spy in there. If they're going to marry a Lannister to a Frey, Riverrun seems a good place to do it. It's now under Frey control, after all. Lannisters and Freys in the same place. That's exactly who Lady Stoneheart is after. So if there is going to be an event like that, that's where it's going to be. Now, would this be Arya? Probably not, because she's in Bravos, and so it will take a while for her to get back. And what's on her list at the moment, her kill list, would potentially take her to King's Landing, or if she hears of John, for example, being up in Winterfell, she might head north. There was one scene, a very random small scene in probably season 7 of Game of Thrones, that I actually really liked, where Arya returns to Westeros, and she's at the inn at the crossroads, and she's there looking, am I going to go north or south? George R. R. Martin does this a lot at the inn at the crossroads. He means it as a crossroads, not just which path you're going to go down to, but which way. This is your fate, is hinging on which direction you're going to go in from this crossroads. And Arya does have the choice. Most of the people left on her list are down in King's Landing, but her family are now assembling once more up in Winterfell. On the show, she chose to go to Winterfell first and then King's Landing. Will she do the same in the books? I do not know, but I liked that moment of choice that was there. So anyway, I think that the Brotherhood Without Banners doing a massacre in Riverrun of the Freys and Lannisters is entirely possible. The other element we've got going on here is the Super PAC, and this perhaps is how Arya may get involved. The super pack of wolves led by Nymeria, Arya's direwolf. George R. Martin has explicitly said that this is basically Chekhov's super pack of wolves. He says you don't introduce, I'm paraphrasing him here, but you don't introduce a massive super pack of wolves and then not use them. They're there for a reason. Something's going to happen. And at the moment, they're just sort of picking off they're picking off random Frey supply chains and things like that. But if you could imagine there being some sort of an attack at, I mean, this is pure speculation. It might be how it goes. Let's say the Brotherhood Without Banners attack the Freys at a wedding, the Freys and the Lannisters at River Run. They make a run for it. There are more of them than there are of the Brotherhood Without Banners, but they've been caught by surprise. They head off out away from River Run, only to find a super pack of wolves chasing them down. And Arya is in. We see this from Arya's perspective, who is walked into Nymeria while she sleeps. That would work on many, many levels, I think. So yeah, the way this is going to go, and I don't know if I've got another question sort of on this, on whether to wrap that up with it as well. Yeah, so I'll read out the other questions, but just to sort of round this off, the Freys are scattered across the Seven Kingdoms. There are a lot of them in the north. I think that their fate is also largely sealed. Some have already been killed by the Umbers outside of Winterfell. The rest are heading, or a number of the rest are heading, the cavalry with the Manderleys towards Stannis. The Manderleys are going to be on Team Stannis. The Freys are going to be outnumbered, encircled, and defeated in the north. Down in the Riverlands, then those who are in River Run and elsewhere, they will be destroyed, and I suspect in the ways that I've said, which will just leave the twins as the sole base left of the Freys. And I think probably at some point, Lord Frey, Walder Frey himself, will probably die. And they will be encircled, and that will probably be the end of it. But some may survive. Zakalok saying, "Bonjour, Robert. Bonjour to you." As George R. Martin presents them, Freys make me think of rats. There are so many of them, and once you kill one, a new one appear. If this house is doomed, which rat Frey do you think will survive to the end? And 444 saying, do you think that they are doomed as a family and no one will survive to the end, or maybe someone loyal like Oliver Frey will take charge, or maybe Big Walder become the leader and start the golden age of House Frey? So who will survive? I think some Freys will. I think this is the short version here. There are so many Freys. I do not think that all Freys will die. And if I had to pick some that might survive, I think you've picked two of them there. I think Oliver, there's a chance, nobody's asked about this yet. I can talk about this if you're interested. There's a chance that Oliver is actually down in Rosby right now, but he's certainly not in the Twins, and he doesn't seem to be in River Run. He's somewhere else. He is loyal to the Starks. I think there's a fair chance he could survive. I think that Black Walder is a fascinating character. I think George R. R. Martin will enjoy writing him, and I think there's a fair chance that he might survive. And then I think that Big Walder, when he's introduced, they're playing. If you remember, they played a game with Bran and I think Rickon called King of the Crossing, and it was Big Walder who more often than not won and was king of the crossing. That feels like it might have been foreshadowing. If he does survive, if he's cunning enough, if he gets rid of enough of the Freys that are ahead of him in the line succession, I think he could possibly survive. So I think those are the three I would instinctively have as the favourites to be surviving. I think House Frey as a whole will be destroyed, but there will be a few. You can't kill all of them. Charis Ballerina, why is Rosalind locked up with Edmure? Is she not on a family side? Didn't she agree to participate in the Red Wedding? So this is house arrest as much as anything else, and it's Walder Frey hedging his bets, I think, is what this is. So they're not locked in a miserable dungeon. She's not locked in a miserable. He's kept in reasonable quarters. She's kept in reasonable quarters, and what he could have done very easily, if he'd wanted to, was stop after the wedding, before the bedding. He could have just had somebody just grab her and take away, and then arrest Edmure. But he didn't. He wanted the wedding to be fully consummated, and which means that he wanted his family to be married to the Tullys, and he wants her to have his child. Now, the only reasonable thing here is, or assumption we have to make, I think, is that he is just hedging his bets. He just thinks, okay, what if this all goes pear-shaped? What if the whole thing just changes and suddenly it's no longer House Bolton who are the most powerful family? What if House Tully suddenly become powerful again? I need to hedge my bets with this one way, which is that House Tully, the Lord of House Tully, is married to a Frey, and his child is half Frey. That means that even if House Tully somehow by some miracle get back into power, they are tied to me. So I think that's what's going on there. Maura Leo, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. I answered your question a moment ago, but thank you very much. Saying just to show a love and support. That's incredibly generous, Maura. You know how much I appreciate your support. Thank you. Jennifer Pierce saying Rosalind cried before the wedding. I don't think she had the option to disagree. I would agree with that. I don't think she did have the option. I think she'd been told what was going to happen and just told she had to live with it. Okay, two more questions. Actually, that was my last question about the phrase. So if you've got more questions about the phrase, now is the time to drop them into the chat. Couple of questions to go from my patrons. Rasla saying, hi, Robert. I didn't have a time to place this last week, but do you think the Blackwoods would have been more effective as Lord Paramount of the Trident and had better control over the vassals? Compared to the Tullys, perhaps, but I think the thing with the Blackwoods is that they are always in competition with the Brackens, and the Brackens would always have been trying to undermine them. So with the Tullys, I've said many times, even in this stream, but it's just that yes, they weren't really respected by the other main houses in the Riverlands, but at the same time, they weren't really undermined. They didn't have any actual enemies. It's not that anyone hated them. It's just that nobody really respected them. So the Blackwoods, some people would respect them, but they would always have a very powerful rival there, trying to stir up trouble against them. I think that the Freys would still have tried to be insubordinate, and I think that the Brackens would have found natural allies there. Oh, pardon me. So I think that there would have been a very different dynamic. But just because they were more established than the Tullys, I don't think that necessarily means that they would have done a better job. Okay. Ms. Fox saying, hi, Robert. Hi there. Would a marriage between Fagon and Dany settle any claim issues, provided they both agree? It seems not all Targaryens bonded with dragons, so Fagon being a Targaryen but not being a dragon rider isn't out of the realm of possibility. Perhaps I'm grasping at straws because I feel bad for Fagon and I don't want him to meet a fiery end. Okay, would it settle any claim issues? Well, between the Targaryens, if they come to an agreement, perhaps, although it's noticeable that even in the occasions when there was sort of joint rulership, the one person was nominally in charge. Jaehaerys and Alicent basically co-ruled, but Jaehaerys is the person who was remembered in the list of rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon and his sister wives effectively co-ruled, but he was the one who was remembered as king. So there, as much as they might have liked this idea, we'll power share, it never really worked out like that. Would it have dealt with succession issues? As I say, maybe for the Targaryens, but not for anyone else. Many people didn't think that the Targaryens should, that they think that Stannis should rule, or they should think that the North should be ruling itself, or the Iron Islands should be ruling itself. So it wouldn't solve everything. It might solve a few small issues. One factor in this that I think is worth kind of drawing out. We often emphasize the vision that Dany had in the House of the Undying, where she's told that she's Slayer of Lies. This is her fate, Slayer of Lies. And one of those lies seems to be a cloth dragon swaying on poles amidst a cheering crowd. And that seems to be Fagon. That's that's the running best guess as to who that is. She is the Slayer of Lies. One of the other lies seems to be Stannis, blue-eyed person, fiery sword, da-da-da. This seems to be Stannis, and she's going to show that he's not Azor Ahai reborn, and she's going to show that this is where the logic goes, that she's going to show that Fagon is not actually a Targaryen. And people say, how is that going to happen? And then the default answer is, well, we've already had a bit of foreshadowing here with Quentyn trying to tame a dragon, and that didn't work. So is he going to come to a fiery end? That's the kind of the working assumption. I want to add an extra layer to this to perhaps balance this a little bit, which is something that Dany, she thinks of a couple of times. And I got a quote out from what she thinks, is that following on from the House of the Undying and from Quaithe, who basically gives her this whole list of don't trust this person, don't trust that person, don't trust that person, just trust yourself. And the House of the Undying is all about you're going to be betrayed 3 times. She starts thinking, who can I actually trust? She's realized she can't trust Jorah. Who is there out there that she can trust? And then she thinks this: the dragon has 3 heads. There are 2 men in the world who I can trust if I can find them. I will not be alone then. We will be 3 against the world, like Aegon and his sisters. So she thinks that on some level, maybe not all the time, but on some level, she thinks that she's going to find 2 more Targaryens who are going to be her brother husbands, perhaps, and then they are the 2 that she will be able to trust. Now, it doesn't take much to go, well, hang on a moment, we've got 2 possible Targaryens, we've got Fagon, we've got Jon. Doesn't take much to sort of go down that route to think, well, is that where we're going with this story? The more intriguing thing is not just, is that where the logic of the story goes, is that if that is the thought in her head, what is going to be her reaction when she meets somebody who claims to be Aegon Targaryen? So this is suggesting that perhaps we automatically think that she's going to be like, no, you're not a Targaryen, I'm the ruler, you're just... This suggests there's at least a part of her that wants to trust him, that thinks, this is the Targaryen I'm looking for. This is one of those two men that I will be able to trust with my life. So the dynamic, it's not been fully developed yet. We're just getting hints here. But the dynamic is not as straightforward as we sometimes think it might be. There will be part of her that is looking there to be slaying the lies. There will be part of her that's looking to, here's someone I can trust. Okay, that's all my questions that I've got from my patrons, but let's pick up as many questions as we can in the chat. Charis Ballerina, I noticed that the 3 Pi Freys all at one point in time lied about the truth of the Red Wedding. Is it just karmic justice that these specific Freys got turned into pies, or did Wyman target them because of this? This is like Frey pie. The theory goes, yeah, it's a good theory. It seems to work. Is that he killed them. He turned them into pie. This is the pie thing that we got on the TV show. Arya seems to have done this. Seems to be nods to this in the books, putting Freys into pies, feeding it to people. He's quite grisly, but did he cherry pick? No. He picked these Freys that were killed by Wyman Manderley were because they were the ones who came to see him. He is just gonna kill the Freys that he can. He hates them, absolutely loathes them, and so it wasn't a cherry picking these ones because they are in particular bad Freys. Any Freys he can get his hands on. We talk about the desire for revenge from Lady Stoneheart, which is clearly off the scale, but the Manderleys, Wyman Manderley in particular, and others in the north have got a huge need for revenge as well. Would Lucien Frey have been better as High Septon over the High Sparrow, or did the kingdom dodge a bullet since he bribed his way into power? So the High Sparrow, I mean, this is sort of tangent, but not really, I guess. So the rise of the High Sparrow, I think, would have challenged, history suggests, would have challenged any High Septon. So yes, we get the phrase, Walder is not just trying to marry off all of his family. He's dropping some of them. One of them's gone off to train for a Maester. One of them's in Septon. They are being dropped off in other strategically important places. Would having a Frey being there as High Septon rather than the really quite ineffective High Septons we had on the show, not in the show, in the books during this period, would that have helped against the High Sparrow? I don't think anything could have. What we've got is, and we'll see this, I think, probably in House of the Dragon, but if you think about Fire and Blood, the High Sparrow is a sort of an echo of the Shepherd, who was the person who led the attack on the storming of the Dragon Pit, in as much as he comes up from the people as this kind of expression of the true faith, and is recognized as their leader. And that expression of true faith then turns itself against the powers that be, who are against the real people, the small folk of King's Landing, and they take up arms against their oppressor. So they're not the same story, but they are echoes of each other, and that is not something which, any High Sparrow, any High Septon could really have stopped, because it wasn't about them and the church infrastructure, which is what the High Septon's really in charge of. It's about the mass feeling coming up from the ground. Andrew K saying, I think that's the bittersweet aspect with Danny taking out Fagon, longing for family but can't be 100% sure he is a pretender in the end. Yeah, absolutely. I do sometimes wonder whether we will ever find out for sure. Certainly, I suspect Danny will always have doubts whether this actually was her family member. She will have to make a decision at some point, but I think she will always have doubts. And has she got rid of, if she is the person who does this, has she got rid of one of the few people that she should be able to trust? April May saying Barbary and Manderley met and talked before Manderley talked to Davos. I mean, I don't know whether it was that order, but Barbary, Dustin, and people working on behalf of Wyman Manderley definitely have been talking in Winterfell. Is my general feeling. Can we flick through the chat? Lem saying, forgot what day it is. Excited to watch this back at my 7 a.m. shift tomorrow. Will you enjoy that 7 a.m. shift? Anna Sanchez saying, I think Lothar might be a good candidate for Cersei. There's that one council meeting she mentions that someone should be punished for the Red Wedding. Kind of bizarre, I know, but she does say that. Yeah, I mean, she's got this kind of weird attitude, is that clearly she sees that on the side, but also she I think is a little bit suspicious of people who can switch sides quite so easily. She's quite mercurial, obviously, in her own way, is Cersei. Andrew Kay saying Walder creating a huge family likely inadvertently created a powder keg too large to control and many ambitious cutthroat members. Yes, but he may well survive all the way through to the other end. Okay, let's go. I think good question. Alexandra just saying, if Fagon lived with Illyrio and Danny lived there, why didn't they run into each other? So Danny and Illyrio only met each other. So Danny only lived with Illyrio right at the very end. The last bit just before the story that we have. She was there for, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. But Fagon was basically sent out to experience the world with his minders, like John Connington and co. So no, their paths will not have crossed by that point. Okay. I think with that, let me just go to tell you what's coming up next week. I've still got that live stream doing a sort of a breakdown of the Storm of Swords coming up at some point soon. I haven't organized that one yet. I really should do. Next week, let's do another one of these. Let's do, what should we do? Let's do House Mallister, which is not a house that gets huge amounts of attention, but they are a fascinating house. So let's do House Mallister next week. In the meantime, we've got the video that I can't remember what it is coming out tomorrow. It's going to be on the Song of Ice and Fire video anyway. Again, fingers crossed. Hope it's a good one. I can't remember what it is. And then on Monday, I think my Lord of the Rings video is going to be why didn't they take the ring to Valinor? Why did they bother with all the hardship of going east to try and destroy it? Why not just take it to Valinor where they could destroy it there? So that's my video coming on Mondays. That's something to look forward to. But till then, if you're watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere here is going to be a link to other live streams. Appearing somewhere here is going to be a link to my Patreon page, the best way to support this channel, if you so wish. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Been really good on this one. I've enjoyed this. Take care, and I will see you again same time next week.